Alright, and again, welcome back. I've proceeded along to the rear spar doubler of the vertical stabilizer. In these next couple steps, I'm going to be countersinking several of the holes on the base or the bottom of the doubler, and that's to fit the rear spar where there are dimples that you make in the rear spar itself, so it sits flush along the doubler. And so here I am just looking at the instructions, just really trying to double check which holes I'm supposed to countersink, which side I'm supposed to countersink, because everything is match drilled for how it was clecoed together. So you want to make sure you're dimpling countersinking the right face, which is the one that's facing the rear spar from when you match drilled earlier in the steps here. So right here, I've got a cage set up on the drill that allows control depth of how much you're drilling, and this is actually right there where I just made my fatal error in this piece, and why I ended up having to replace it and order a new one. There's at the end of the bit, there's a little guide nub that goes through and sits inside of the hole and just guides the drill bit so that you're countersinking accurately. And what I didn't realize, being that this is the first time I've tried to do anything like this, is that that nub is also hitting the tabletop. And so as I'm drilling, I'm not seeing any metal removed, so I'm assuming that the cage is just not set correctly. So I'm moving the cage to allow more of the drill bit to be exposed before it stops. And I do that a couple times and still no change, and do it a couple times more and still no change. And then finally it's like, well, let's try it over the edge of the table without going back to the first setting that I had it at. And so as soon as I drilled, I saw a whole bunch of metal shavings come off, and I thought to myself, well, that doesn't look right. And so I continued on to some of the other holes and readjusted to what looked like was more accurate of a depth for the drill bit, and continued to countersink the remaining holes that required it. And several days after this, I contemplated what to do with that piece. If there's a way to recover from it. Even spoke with my grandfather-in-law, who had built an RV-4 previously, and tried to come up with an idea of how to salvage the piece. And we discussed maybe putting in epoxy with the hole that's with the countersunk hole that's too deep, and when you rivet it, maybe the epoxy would set. And ultimately, after thinking it over some more, decided nope, just order a new piece. Better safe than sorry. No reason to cut corners on this. And like I said, the pieces in this kit are not overly expensive by themselves. So basically used the rest of this as practice, and now I have it to be able to kind of test my settings of my my countersink cage in the future. And so it's again, lessons learned, and you just kind of go forward with it. So the rest of this is going to be doing the rest of the countersinking on this piece, even though ultimately it's a futile effort. And then the thing with it, it's got the toolkit that I purchased from Cleveland Aircraft Tools has about 4 or 5 different drill bits for countersinking. You'll have one size 40 for your 3/32 holes, which is a good number of the countersinking you do. And then also it has a number 30, which I think is what I was using there for the 1/8" holes. And then it's got I believe it's a number 10 that you end up using on the lead weight for the top of the rudder. And so there's various sizes. You just make sure you look on it and you're using the right one, and there for the different size heads of the different rivets and screws that you're gonna use. And I think here is where I've gotten rid of the adjustable ram for the pneumatic squeezer and have gone to just the standard ram, which requires using spacers on each of the bits. And it works a lot better now that I've gone to this ram instead of the adjustable. As I said before, I accidentally bent the adjustable ram by overextending the ram and then squeezing with it, so it became useless. So this is the again, this is the rear spar on the vertical stabilizer, and there's a few holes that you'll dimple. And right there, I'm just verifying to myself which holes need to be dimpled and matching them up, and just again using the C-frame here to dimple those. And once I get the replacement part, and I'll obviously get it ready and apply primer to it, I'll have to redo everything with it, including all the match drilling and all the prep work for it. And then I'll do the countersinking and then get to this step again where it's ready to cleco and rivet to the rear spar. And then once you get that in, you attach the rudder hinge brackets and finish the rest of the riveting to attach everything to the rear spar, and then you start putting the skeleton together. So at this point, I think I mentioned in the last video, I've gone on to working on my rudder itself while I was waiting for these parts. And then when these parts came in, I was about halfway done with the rudder anyway, so I figured I'll finish the rudder and then I'll get back to this once I'm finished with the rudder. So hopefully here in the next couple days I'll be able to do that. The rudder itself doesn't take a lot. I'm at the step now while I'm editing this video. I'm at the step on the rudder where you have to do the double rivets or double flush rivet on the trailing edge of the rudder. And it's a critical step in that how well you do this step will determine how straight the rudder is. So it's going to take a little bit of effort to make sure that it's clecoed straight, and that as I'm riveting in the correct order. But all that's going to be in a couple videos from now. And so the methodology with the countersink, the proper method, I guess, is that you just make real small adjustments and test between each adjustment. So you get the right size rivet and make the first adjustment very small so you barely see any exposure of the drill bit when the cage is bottomed out. Take out some material, test it with the head of a rivet, and if it's still protruding, then you make a small adjustment to your cage again, exposing a little bit more of the drill bit and taking out a little bit more material and testing it, and keeping that process up until you get the rivet head flush with the surface of the metal, or even maybe just a small fraction of a hair deeper of a cut so that the rivet head is slightly below the surface, so that way when you go to squeeze it, it expands and becomes flush. But either way, right around flush is where you want it, and that's when you know you've got a good countersink. And then from there, it's just making sure that as you go through, you test each hole that you're making, because each time you make a hole, you may hold the angle of the drill just slightly different, so it's not quite the same depth. So you want to make sure you're testing every single hole. So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let this video run out, and hopefully be able to get out the next video fairly soon. I'm trying to get one a night as I'm working, but again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time around.